Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love these types of videos and you love true crime, go ahead and leave me a comment down below letting me know what you want to see next, any case suggestions, and please make sure to subscribe, guys. It would mean so much to me. So today's case was requested by the lovely Caitlin, so thank you so much, Caitlin. And as soon as she mentioned Hawaii cases, I was like, hell yeah, because I love Hawaii. And many people actually have this super idealized image of Hawaii. Honolulu is a place that hosts like millions and millions of tourists every single year, majority of whom just want to chill by the beach, Waikiki Beach, relax, drink, enjoy life. And these tourists, they don't think about dangers or human predators while they're, in their resorts, sipping margaritas, chilling. They don't think about that. Me and my husband especially, I don't know what it is. It is one of our favorite places we've ever been to. I don't know if it's the water, the amazing people, the culture, the vibes. There's just something about Hawaii. I feel renewed every time. And in many respects, this like idealized image of Hawaii isn't really far from the truth. Hawaii had never had a single serial killer until the year 1985 when the Honolulu Strangler emerged. So the Honolulu Strangler, he was a serial killer that was active during the years 1985 and 1986. He tortured and killed 5 women, and all 5 women were found with their hands bound behind their backs. They had been sexually assaulted and obviously they had been strangled. His victims range between the ages of like 16, 17 to mid-30s, and the police did have a bunch of suspects, but we'll get to that later. First, let's talk about the victims, and there's not a bunch of information out there, so let's begin with the first victim. So Vicky Purdy was an attractive, petite, 25-year-old blonde woman who was married to Gary Purdy, who was a helicopter pilot and a chief warrant officer of the 24th Aviation Battalion. And the two of them had been married for 5 years, and they were living in Milani in Hawaii. And at the time, they had only been living in Hawaii for just a year and a half, like 16 months, because Vicky was originally from North Carolina, but they had moved to Hawaii for Gary, for his job. He was actually stationed in Hawaii at the time as a helicopter pilot for the Army. Vicky worked at the Wahiawa video rental store, and that was a place that kind of dealt with more adult material, like they sold like pornographic films, basically. So that was always a point of contention between her and Gary, because he was like, why are you working at this place? And she was like, I'm working at this place. And it just seemed to be an issue. He did not approve of her working there. And when she was a child, Vicky actually grew up in foster homes, and initially her marriage hadn't really been doing so well. When she was younger, Vicky was a cheerleader. She loved roller skating, and everyone commented about how good looking she was. And she also had a bunch of friends, but Hawaii initially wasn't what she thought it was going to be. Vicky loved to hang out with her friends, and especially going dancing with her girlfriends at clubs. That's something she really loved to do. So on May 29th, 1985, Vicky decided to do exactly that and decided to go out and have a night out with her friends dancing at a club. And the club location was supposed to be in Waikiki on Oahu's south shore. And Gary apparently knew of her plans, so he knew she was going out with her friends. So that morning, he kissed his wife goodbye at around 9 a.m. And apparently he was expecting her home at 9 p.m. that night. But that doesn't really make sense. If you're going clubbing, who comes home at 9 p.m., right? So I think that's inaccurate. So when she didn't return home that night, I'm guessing after 9 p.m., he tried to contact Vicky several times on her pager. And I've never used a pager, but a pager is basically a way to get in contact with someone before cell phones. You'd get a page or a message on this little device, and then you'd have to find a phone to call the person who was paging you back, and then you talk to the person. I think that's how it used to work. And then when Gary got a hold of her friends, Gary found out that Vicky actually contacted her friends before going clubbing. Oh, my neck just almost had a spasm. Jesus. Gary found out that Vicky contacted her friends before going out clubbing, but that she never actually met them at the club. She never made it to the club. Vicky was actually last seen by a taxi driver who took her from a place called the Blue Water Cafe and dropped her off to this place called the Shorebird Hotel, and that was around midnight, and that she was going to this Shorebird Hotel area to collect her car from the parking lot. So the story kind of doesn't make sense, because how did you not meet your friends, but then you're out till midnight and last seen by a taxi driver, and you were picking up your car, indicating that you were done clubbing? You know what I mean? Like, so that information is kind of sketchy, but that's what's out there. So obviously when his wife doesn't return home, Gary tries to contact her a few times, and then eventually he's like, okay, I'm just going to go look for her. So he goes out searching for her. So eventually, while searching for her, Gary ends up finding Vicky's car at this Shorebird Hotel parking lot, which confirms the cab driver's story. But then when he sees the car, he also sees like a fresh dent in the side, which indicates that the car had been in a recent collision. And that was it. That's all he sort of had at the time. The following day, on May 30th, 1985, Vicky's body was discovered on an embankment overlooking a place called Kihi Lagoon, which is like a lagoon that's popular with paddlers. Vicky's body was found wearing the same outfit she had put on to go clubbing, but her underwear was missing. She had her hands tied behind her back, bound, and it was bound with a parachute cord, and she had been assaulted. Later on, an autopsy discovered that she had actually been strangled to death with a cord or a string or a rope type instrument. And it seems like she was lured or had been distracted by that collision to her car in the parking lot, either before making it to her car, or maybe she was in her car and someone hit her and tried to lure her out of her car, something like that. And at first the police checked any connection to her job, like the video store where she worked at, because not that creeps visit video stores, but you know what I mean? Like just anyone that may have been interested in her or looking out for her at the store. And on top of Gary not, liking her working at the store just also had a reputation for the type of people that would visit it. In December 1984, two women, a worker and a co-owner of the store, were actually stabbed to death in the store. So police initially were like, okay, maybe there was a man that was obsessed with Vicky, a porn-obsessed man who had come to the store and was stalking her. But after the police investigated, they could find no connection or link to the store and Vicky's death. Vicky's husband, Gary, he was 6 feet tall, 165 pounds. And looking at him, he could obviously take care of himself. He told media and police that Vicky was really streetwise and she knew who to trust and who not to trust. So she wouldn't have just been lured as easily as one might think. He suggested that it possibly would take two people to kidnap her because of her strength, because he recalled that one time when him and Vicky were in an argument, she knocked the shit out of him. So he stated that she was pretty strong, tough, wouldn't have happened as easily. So then the trail just kind of ran cold. It wouldn't be until 1986 until the killer strikes again. And that was 6 months after Vicky's murder. Regina Sakamoto was only 17 years old. She was still in high school, attending Leilua High School, and she was going to Hawaii Pacific University in the fall. Regina, she was petite like Vicky, but even more so. She was only 4'11" and weighed 105 pounds, which is what, 45 kilos, 47 kilos. And also like Vicky, she wasn't originally from Hawaii. She was actually from Kansas. And Regina was said to be a super quiet, shy girl. And her father was a military serviceman who was stationed in Hawaii at the time too, like Vicky's husband. So she would catch the bus to school, and on Jan 14th, 1986, she actually missed that bus at around 7:15 in the morning. So she calls her boyfriend and she lets him know, I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late to school, miss the bus. And she was actually seen by witnesses a little time later standing around waiting for the next bus. And that was the last that anyone had ever seen of her. And It was possible that someone offered her a ride, knowing that she was late, maybe overheard a conversation, and she possibly accepted that lift from someone. The following day, on January 15th, 1986, Regina was found dead at the same place Vicky was, Kihi Lagoon, but she was found about a mile away from where Vicky's body was found. Just like Vicky, her hands were found bound behind her back, tied with a parachute cord. She was still wearing her blue tank top and her white sweatshirt, but she was found nude from the waist down. She had also been assaulted and strangled. And now the difference between Vicky and her, there were two new aspects of it. One being that she was found nude from the waist down. And the second was that her feet were tied to a rock with an electrical cord. Police immediately linked the two cases and they were like, yep, we've got a serial killer on our hands. And also the location where these two girls were found, Kihi Lagoon, it's like an urban beach park. And there was ready access to the ocean and it was dotted with like tiny little islands. And it was fairly secluded and it made kind of like a good, I guess, dumping ground for the killer. Regina's brother Omar recalled Regina as being very bookish, smart, fun-loving. She was the type of girl that kind of got along with everybody. Everybody liked her. And he recalls that on the day of her disappearance that she was just running late for school and waiting for a bus outside, this diner in Waipahu. Regina's stepfather, however, he kind of had like a different take and he was kind of very blunt. He stated that Regina living down there with her Caucasian features just wasn't a good idea and that she was putting her life on the line. And he believes that her features and living where she lived that just don't mix. He believes that Regina stood out and was a target purely because of her Caucasian features. Now, an autopsy once conducted on Regina found that she had indeed been assaulted, and what was found inside of her was high levels of acid phosphate, which is a fluid emitted from a man, most likely a man who had had a vasectomy. And, after this killing, the police were like, okay, well, he took 6 months last time, so they thought they had enough time to sort of figure this one out, but they were wrong. And unfortunately, the killer would strike again just 2 weeks later. On January 30th, 1986, like I said, just 2 weeks later, a 21-year-old Denise Hughes failed to show up at work. She was employed as a secretary at a telephone company. Again, she was a Navy wife, right? Like all three of these women. Something to do with the Army or the Navy, are those two different things, similar things, right? And her husband, Charles, he was actually stationed at Pearl Harbor. And similar to Regina, she also took public transport, so the bus, to and from work every single day. And, usually when you do stuff like that, you probably build like this routine that can be like very readable to some people, especially people who are stalking you. And again, Denise was not originally from Hawaii. She was a native of Washington State. So yeah, when she didn't show up for work, she was reported missing. But just a couple days later, on 1st February 1986, her body was found. And her body, when it was found, was already found decomposing. And it was found by 3 fishermen because it was wrapped in a tarp in the Moana Lua stream, which flowed into Kihi Lagoon. Again, her hands were tied behind her back with a parachute cord and she had been strangled to death. And she was only identified on February 5th because her remains and her dental records were actually sent to the mainland, and that's when she was identified as being Denise Hughes. And because, her body had already been decomposing and it had been a couple of days, the autopsy couldn't actually say that she had been assaulted sexually, but most likely it was. They just couldn't exactly confirm, yes, it had been. There was 0 concealer left in this, and I'm trying to get every last bit. Denise's work supervisor, Donna, said that Denise had been the type of person who always had a smile on her face no matter what. And she says the day before Denise's disappearance, everyone at the office had been sick from the flu. And Denise, even though everyone was sick and she had to do everything by herself at the reception desk, she was just smiling. And Donna was like, I can't believe you still have a smile on your face. And that's just what Denise was always like. And then the next day, she vanishes. So now knowing that they had a serial killer on their hands, the Honolulu Police Department ended up establishing a 27-person team, which was made up of detectives from both sex crimes and homicide. And they also enlisted the help of the FBI and the Green River Task Force. Like the unknown Honolulu Strangler, the Green River Killer also strangled his victims, although his targets were often runaways and like prostitutes and stuff like that, which video comment on that. The Honolulu Task Force created a profile for the Honolulu Strangler, claiming that he was more of an opportunist who attacked vulnerable women in vulnerable situations, such as waiting at a bus stop, and that they did not believe that he was actually a stalker, and that he likely lived in Waipahu or Sand Island, and that he most likely drove a cargo van, most likely Caucasian or mixed race, between the ages of 30 and 40, and again, most likely had no criminal record. They believed that at this point in his life that he was probably experiencing some issues in his own personal life. They believed that he was probably experiencing, some girlfriend or marital issues, and that the selection of his victims were more likely like just an opportunity or like chance encounters. And it's crazy how profilers work, isn't it? Like, I'd be so interested to learn more about their job and how they do it. Like, it's just crazy how they come up with like a whole thing of who they think these people are without even knowing them. So shortly after this task force was set up, two-way radios were placed into buses citywide, which would allow for bus drivers to call for assistance if they ever saw something shady or. However, even though they made all these efforts, it would sort of be in vain, because on March 26th, 1986, Louise Medeiros goes missing. Louise was 25 years old, and while she originally lived in Waipahu, she was visiting her extended family in Kauai. And while she usually lived in Waipahu, she was actually visiting Kauai because she had to attend there for the reading of her late mother's will, because she had recently passed, and she was also 3 months pregnant at the time. And obviously going through a bunch of different emotions. Your mother died and then you were 3 months pregnant, and it's a lot. Louise had actually had a bit of an eventful life. She left her family as a teenager, and she was in trouble with the law a lot. She lived with beach people a lot, and she had 3 children, and her daughter was actually living in foster care. However, by the time Louise moved home to Waipua, she had sort of like regained her life back. She moved on from being rebellious and feeling alienated by her family. And her sister Brenda says she was finally happy. She had found peace within herself. She was starting like her new life. So because she was in Kauai for the reading of that will, she had to travel back to Waipahu to get home. And Louise planned to catch a bus back to her apartment from the airport. Like, that's how she planned to get home. Again, public transport. And she told her family of her intention to catch this bus home, and she told them about her plans and how she was actually, going to make it home. Louise never arrived home, and she was last seen leaving the plane after it landed in Honolulu. On April 2nd, 1986, Louise's body was found, and it was found by road workers near Waikili Stream, which is beneath a freeway overpass, which was like 12 miles from the previous killing. Again, she was nude from the waist down, and her hands had been bound. And again, due to the decomposition, what it had been, like March 26th, 4, 5, 6, 7, like a week. So she had been, missing for a week at this point. And due to the decomposition, her sexual assault was never confirmed, but it was confirmed that she had been strangled to death. And now, realizing that all 3 previous victims were dumped near Honolulu Airport, and that Louise had passed through the airport, the police then decide to set up this new sting with undercover, women, cops, posted to Kihi Lagoon and the airport. I mean, by now it's pretty clear that this killer, he favors out-of-town victims, people who aren't really familiar as yet with Hawaii. So unfortunately, this tactic and this new sting operation as well yielded no results, and the Honolulu Strangler would strike for the fifth and final time. So on April 29th, 1986, 36-year-old Linda Pesky leaves her apartment in the morning, and then she doesn't return home in the evening. And this alarms her roommate because she missed a prearranged work meeting, which was unlike Linda. And her roommate states that she saw Linda leave the morning of April 29th. And then the next morning, Linda's roommate gets informed by Linda's work that Linda never showed up. And then Linda's roommate also finds out that Linda's light blue Toyota car was found on like this viaduct, which is like a series of bridges. And it was found on this bridge unlocked. So I don't know how she found out about this, but then once she finds out, she immediately informs the police. Investigators learned that on the night of April 29th, witnesses had seen this light blue Toyota parked on this bridge, but there was another car parked right next to her, and the light blue Toyota, so Linda's car, had her emergency like flashing lights on, and this other vehicle was like parked beside her, almost indicating that this car was helping Linda's car. The vehicle beside Linda's was described as cream colored, of an American make, and it had like stickers on its back window. Eyewitnesses also described seeing a man in his 30s or 40s of Caucasian or mixed race standing around the area, and everything like fit the profile of what the police profiled the Honolulu Strangler as. Isn't that crazy? These profilers. Okay, so now this is where things get kind of crazy. I mean, depending on the source or the information is kind of like jumbled. And there are two different accounts of what happens next, but they both involve the same man. And this man is like, most people think that this is the killer. So now Linda's been missing since April 29th, and there would be no leads as to where she is or would be until May 3rd. And the reason for this was because police ended up receiving like a tip from a man named Howard Andrew Gay, and he was a 43-year-old Caucasian male. And Howard claimed that he knew the location of Linda's body because a psychic had told him. He never named who this psychic was, but he informed the police that Linda's body would be at Sand Island, which was like this tiny little island at the entrance to Honolulu's harbor. So Howard ends up taking the police to Sand Island, to this spot where he thinks, where he's told by psychics that Linda's body would be. So police go with him, they take him there, and he takes police to this like specific location, but Linda's body obviously wasn't there. So then police are like, okay, what the fuck? So they go and they decide, while we're here, let's just search the rest of this island, Sand Island. So police end up searching, and then eventually they find Linda's nude body off this dirt road with her hands tied with a parachute cord, same as the other victims. And as with Regina, I believe it was, they also find acid phosphatase around her genitals. So the thing about acid phosphatase and a vasectomy, I believe, and this is just from my understanding because everywhere I research, there's like so many like medical articles and I'm just like, me don't get it. So I'm just going to explain to you what I think it is. So from what I understand, basically when a man has a vasectomy, he gets his like sperm tube thing cut off. So which means that his seminal fluid when he ejaculates basically has no sperm in it. And most of that like fluid that the buddies would be swimming in, like the liquid, would be acid phosphatase. So yeah, that's the liquid that they found in these victims, indicating that the man had no sperm dudes in his swimming fluid. That's the fluid they found. So Linda had been partially covered with dirt and debris, and there was also like a cement block found on her back. And it's just so weird how this Howard guy like leads them to this island. You know what I mean? Like what a weird coincidence. So then the other version of this Howard guy's story goes like this. He first came to police's attention before Linda's body had been found, and he voluntarily presented himself to the police because he claimed that he had found some bones on Sand Island. So then investigators go there, they grab these bones, they process it, and then they find out that these are actually bones belonging to a pig. And then that's how they end up finding Linda's body. They search the rest of the island, blah, blah, blah. That's what happens. So going on the psychic version, they claim that police were pretty sus about this whole psychic story, this unnamed psychic. He never told them who it was. The psychic was never found. And they began looking into him because he directly fit the police profile of the killer. Staff at the La Mariana Sailing Club reported that while he seemed sort of clean-cut and unsuspicious, his behavior at the club had given them some cause for concern, because they said that he became obsessed with an employee of the sailing club who directly matched the description of most of his victims. So the sailing club staff said that he would always visit the club and he would stare at this employee and he would always offer her rides home, and that she always rejected him, and that on one occasion he lost his shit when he offered her a ride or whatever and she was like, no. But then she ended up taking this offer from a biker at the club and he completely lost it. And while this is not connected to the sailing club incident, Howard was also a suspect in beating up a woman who refused to get into his vehicle. So we don't know how many times he had offered women rides and they had, rejected him, how many times if he is the killer, this guy's attempts failed. So on May 9th, 1986, police arrested Howard Andrew Gay as their prime suspect. So Howard, he was originally from Buffalo, New York, and he had been in the military stationed at an airbase in California, and he was honorably discharged in 1965. But he then worked in various jobs as a telephone lineman, a delivery driver, and then he ended up working as a mechanic at an air freight carrier in Lagoon Drive. And he drove a cream-colored vehicle. He was married at one time and he had 2 children, but then he got divorced in 1983. Do you guys remember what I said before about the police profiling, that this guy most likely started on his crimes because he was in some issues with his marriage or a girlfriend or something like that, and crime started in 1985 and he got divorced in 1983, so pretty fresh. Howard was also in his 40s. He had a vasectomy. And he had no criminal record, which directly matches the police's profile. He worked at the airport with air freight, which means he directly had access to parachute cords. His ex-wife and his girlfriend stated that he was a really persuasive talker, that he enjoyed bondage, and most notably, tying them up during sex with their hands behind their back. Howard's girlfriend at the time also revealed that when she looked at everything, the evidence, she was like, dang, these women were killed on the nights that we had arguments and fights where he stormed out of their home in anger. Howard was interrogated for 10 hours and a polygraph test returned just inconclusive. And there was no evidence directly linking him to the crimes, at least no evidence that would have, been dismissed as circumstantial. So because of this, police were forced to release Howard. And after Howard was released, he actually spoke to the media and he released a statement. And he said, "The police have released me. That's all I know. They have plenty of good cause to, interrogate me. They're just doing their job." So besides the inconclusive polygraph test, one of the facts against Howard was the fact that Linda's boss actually had Howard's full name written on a notepad in her office. And this was that he could be a potential customer for the company. And this directly linked him to Linda's workplace right before, his story about the psychic and finding her body. The second piece of evidence was the eyewitnesses that saw the cream-colored van parked next to Linda's blue Toyota on the night that Linda vanished. And when one of the eyewitnesses was asked to pick out the man that she had seen standing by the side of the road near Linda's car on the night she vanished, the eyewitness directly identified Howard in a lineup. But yet when she was asked to testify and be yeah, this is the man, she refused because she was so scared that Howard had seen her during the lineup, and she was like, I'm scared for my life. I've seen him and he's seen me. I'm not going to testify. So after this, the police ended up monitoring Howard for years, and they even offered like a $25,000 reward for any information, but they could never pin him on any of the 5 murders. Isn't that insane? And after this, all the killings stopped, but no justice was ever found for any of those victims. In June of 1986, Howard returns to California to see his son Jason graduate. And while he was there, his son Jason, he was killed in a car wreck. He was on the side of the road, like changing a tire, and then he got hit by a car and he died. And after this, Howard was like, he saw this as like some form of divine retribution. So he became a born-again Christian. And then he later moved back to California, but he died soon after in 2003 at the age of 60 due to kidney failure. In 2016, the former homicide lieutenant Gary Dias, he was actually the head of the Honolulu PD's squad at the time these killings took place. He said that based on the evidence they had and the witnesses that they had and the physical evidence that they had, the parachute cords, everything, they felt that they had enough. But he believes that DNA at the time, if it was better, it would have been more of an asset in finding the killer and bringing justice to all the victims. I just find it weird, like, you know, the seminal fluid they found, does that not have your DNA in it? Like, couldn't they, that's legit DNA, right? Like, how can they link other crimes with sperm, but then not with the fluid without the sperm? Or maybe that's what they mean by the DNA system just sucked back then. And the police say that while there was never any like real physical evidence to identify the Honolulu Strangler, the police believed that Howard was their guy. Police who worked the case were interviewed years later, and they said that they had chased this up for years, and they spoke to many people and many other leads, you know, regarding cream-colored vans, and nothing ever led back to anything but Howard. And the same task force claims that they all believe Howard did it, but he just got away with it. And it seems no coincidence that all the killings stopped after Howard's initial arrest, and the fact that he became a born-again Christian, like, just stopped. And I guess that's where the tricky thing sort of lies with evidence and how we prove who did it and who, you know what I mean? Like, who commits these crimes. Because for me, the parachute cord, the freaking eyewitness on the side of the road, the cream-colored van, the fact that his name was on a note in Linda's office, the fact that everything was like military and like army related, which was exactly him, the fact that he, you know, fit the profile exactly looks-wise, you know, career-wise, and the fact that his wife and everything, the marriage dissolved 2 years before the killing started. But we all know that when marriages end, it's not just like it ends and that's when it ends. It probably was like a long drawn-out process, and he was frustrated. His girlfriend said that the killings happened on the nights that, you know, they had fights and he was angry. Like, it just blows my mind that there was nothing else they could do, you know? The period between the 1960s and the 1990s is known as like the golden age for serial killers and murderers and things like that, because many of them got away with their crimes as technology and DNA, it just wasn't as advanced, you know, for that whole period. And it didn't advance significantly enough to apprehend a suspect or to prove, you know, evidence against a suspect. And without this sort of like factual evidence, the identity of the Honolulu Strangler is always going to remain, you know, unknown. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, do you think what I think? I think Howard did it. Like, everywhere I read, it all leads back to Howard. And like these suspects don't just come out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be some type of reason, or, you know, like there has to be something. And for me, everything's linking to Howard. I hope you guys found today's case interesting. It's annoying when we don't have an answer, but we all know the answer. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Leave me your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.